contributor to the air quality improvements achieved at the end of the 20th century. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mrs. Livingston? Mrs. Livingston? I'm finished, Mrs. Livingston.
Yes, right, of course. Thank you very much, Arthur. That was terrific. You obviously spent a great deal of time in your research, and it really showed. Such detail. Just really a great, great job. You should be proud. I hope the rest of you took this project as seriously as Arthur, because if you didn't, you're just not going to pass. All right, I know. Enough lecture. I just wanted to make sure that, Well, Mr. Tyler, now that you've had a nice little rest, we'd all just love to hear you tell us everything there is to know about, the resource revolution. You are ready, right, Hal?
Sure thing, Mrs. L. As Mrs. L, Livingston said, my report is on the resource revolution. To begin with, you have to understand why there was a resource revolution. Basically, we were burying ourselves in our own garbage. As a matter of fact, archaeologists have discovered that the ancient Greeks were the first people to bury their garbage in a hole in the ground. Ever since then, that seems to have been the most popular way of getting rid of garbage. You know, out of sight, out of mind. That worked pretty well for a few hundred years. But of course, cities got bigger, more crowded. Then you had the Industrial Revolution. That's like the first 30 or 40 years of the 20th century, when they developed mass production techniques. At the same time, people began earning more money and had more to spend on all those new things. I guess you can see it got to the point where there were so many people and they were generating so much garbage that pretty soon they started running out of places to bury it. Believe it or not, until they started actually running out of space to bury their garbage, nobody thought too much about recycling. People used to toss all kinds of stuff in the trash. Newspapers, glass and plastic bottles, aluminum cans, everything, without ever really thinking about it. All they knew was that once or twice a week, it all just magically went away. When stuff began piling up all over the place, they had to start thinking about where it all went. And that's when somebody came up with a bright idea. Let's see if we can reuse some of this. Things went kind of slow at first, but finally, more and more people started to recognize that there'd be lots of benefits to recycling.
You mean they all didn't know that if they collected and reused glass or aluminum or plastic, they wouldn't have as much garbage to bury? And why didn't they realize that if they recycled, they wouldn't have to keep using up all new raw materials?
Hal, maybe I can help out here. I think the simplest explanation is that they'd never had to think that way before. And like anything that's new, it took a while for people to get used to it. But eventually, Arthur, everyone came to understand that the Earth's resources aren't unlimited, and that recycling and reducing waste have to be essential parts of our lives.
Righto, Mrs. Livingston. Anyway, like I was saying, they were kind of slow coming out of the box, but at least they were trying. According to the archives, by the end of the 80s, the United States was recycling about 11% of its trash. People were pretty proud of themselves. But like I said, the people who were our age, in high school during the 1990s, they knew more could be done, had to be done. And they were the ones who got things jump-started, who were the real activists in the resource revolution, especially when it came to recycling plastics. Check this out. Around the beginning of the 90s, the U.S. was recycling and reusing about 20% of the plastic soft drink bottles. The numbers for things like polystyrene foam weren't as high, but overall not too bad. And they were just getting started at recycling automobile parts, plastic bags, and stuff like that. But the resource revolutionaries of the 90s said, that's not good enough. We could do better. First of all, they made people understand that everybody had to be committed to making recycling work. That meant the companies that manufactured and designed products, the people that bought and used them, governments, everybody had to be on board.
You mean like a team effort?
You're catching on, Pierce. Then they made it easier for people to recycle, because that used to be one of the things people complained about, that it was a big hassle to separate materials. Put glass over here, aluminum cans over there, and newspapers someplace else. They came up with a system, a lot like ours today, in which all the different recyclable materials were collected, along with the other trash, once a week. Then they'd be delivered to a MRF, a municipal recycling facility. And they did the sorting and separation there. Actually, it worked pretty well at first, even though they sorted the stuff by hand. Hey, I know, but at least it was a start. Anyway, before too long, they developed the technology of using laser scanners and conveyor belts to automatically sort and separate the different materials. Glass over here, aluminum over there, plastics here. Then, of course, the stuff would be shredded, compacted, and shipped to the companies that would use it to make new products. The other thing they did with the laser scanners was to use them to read the individual ID codes placed in every type of plastic. This helped make sorting easier. So, by making it easier at home for the people, and by building them these MRFs, they were able to increase the amount of material they could process and reclaim.
Ah, but what did they do with all that recycled plastic?
He's a great straight man. Funny you should ask, Pierce. As you'd expect, they weren't nearly as advanced as we are today, but they did find a lot of uses for recycled plastic. Some of what they came up with back then wasn't too bad. One thing they got really good at was using recycled soft drink bottles and those containers they put laundry detergent in to make new bottles, building supplies, a whole bunch of stuff. My personal favorite is the plastic lumber. Not only does it last longer than wood, plastic lumber needs almost no maintenance. The other big accomplishment for the resource revolutionaries was developing new types of plastics and new uses for them. Most people recognize plastic for what it is, a real wonder material that can be thin or light, or real flexible, or incredibly hard, and not just versatile, but more economical than other materials. And, of course, it's recyclable. All of which leads me to the biggest breakthrough of all for the resource revolutionaries. By the 1990s, they had succeeded in changing the public's attitude toward the raw materials that were taken from the earth and toward the products that were made from them. The resource revolutionaries got people to start thinking about natural resources as something they were just kind of borrowing from the earth for a particular purpose. And after their initial use for that purpose, those resources should be recycled again and again to give them an almost unlimited lifespan. The reason they were successful, it seems, is that not only did they convince the people of the need to recycle and make it easier, they started designing products with recyclability built right into them. By planning for recyclability right from the initial design stage, engineers were able to look beyond just the first use of a product, especially those made from plastic, and plan for its inevitable reprocessing into other stuff. And that's how we got to where we are today. That's the story of the resource revolution. Any questions?
I did have one question before I give everyone else a chance. When I was in high school, back in the late 1980s, a lot of schools tried to teach students about recycling by having us start our own recycling programs right there at school. Was there anything about this kind of thing in the archives?
Well, yeah. The stuff I found showed that those kinds of programs worked really well. The kids back then would start a recycling program in their class, and they'd get really pumped. Then they'd go home and bug their parents to to make sure they were recycling at home too. Am I getting through here?